We're now here again at the Net Zero Nuclear booth, and our theme for today at this panel will be the youth perspective on a nuclear-powered world. So, is nuclear forever? That's the question that we have to discuss today. And with me here, I have a splendid panel. I have, to the left for myself, I have Marc from Spain, I have Aurora from Italy, I have Julia from Poland, and I have André and Rodrigo from Portugal. And we are missing one participant here at the panel. Is William Shackel from Australia, but he might be showing up later. But I think that these five young people will have a good time explaining, is nuclear actually forever? So let's start at the opposite side, down here. Rodrigo, please tell me a little bit about who you are, what you're doing, and what is the landscape in Portugal where you come from. Of course, you're two now, so you can share the time.
Hello, I'm Rodrigo. I'm from Portugal, as he said. I study physics in Portugal, and one of the biggest things we've done is started a group about nuclear advocacy in our university, a student group, to help share the discussion about nuclear energy in Portugal. For now, we don't have a lot of politicians talking about it. We don't have almost anyone talking about it, actually. And that's what we're trying to change. We're trying to make Portugal discuss about nuclear and consider nuclear. I'm not saying it must have nuclear, but at least they should consider it and they should think about it.
Thank you so much. And what I noticed you saying here is that you have to think about nuclear. That's quite a big statement, because you haven't had nuclear in Portugal. And we talked about this earlier today. Is actually we said like Denmark is the country where you have the most anti-nuclear movement. But Portugal, that's even more actually, because you didn't even have the discussion before in that sense. So you two guys are bringing something to the table that we haven't seen before. So please, André, can you elaborate on what Rodrigo said?
Yeah, so you said that Denmark is clearly anti-nuclear, where in Portugal we're like we don't really have a formal opinion of the public. Like the last survey on the people was in 2006. That's like 18 years ago. Nobody really knows what's behind that. And I can tell you from my story, that is, when I go out and ask the people for nuclear, what I get is curiosity. Like, what is it about nuclear? What can it do? What role does it play in the decarbonization? And that's the discussion we want to bring to the public. We want to grab the facts and get it out to the public, to get the people talk about it, get the people think about it, and then have an informal opinion from the industry, from the politicians, and get all them together and create a country where nuclear is possible. You know, that's basically it.
Yeah, so you don't have any you don't need or want nuclear. You just have to research if it is possible in the country. But also just to elaborate on that is that Denmark is not anti-nuclear anymore. Like especially in the population, we have 49% that are pro-nuclear and only 32 that are against nuclear. The politicians, that's another deal. But of course, that's the thing with politicians. They create opinions a little bit more slow than the public. But might go to Julia from Poland. Like, can you present yourself and what are you doing in Poland? Like, Poland is one of the new coming countries that haven't had nuclear before, but you're building a nuclear program, and we heard some very exciting news yesterday about what you're doing in Poland. So can you tell us a little about yourself and your advocacy in Poland?
Okay, so I'm a biologist and I'm a law student right now. Also, I try to continue my master's degree in biology. So, I have a little bit different perspective, maybe a little bit different angle. And in Poland, in general, we were trying to convince the politicians that nuclear is the way. Nuclear is the solution because, as you may know, Polish energy sector is like almost full of coal. Like, we have the dirtiest energy policy in Europe right now. So that's a huge problem, and we are convinced that we have to do something with that. And right now nuclear is on the table, fully on the table. We are going to have first nuclear power plant in the north, And right now we have the decision for the second, like big-scale nuclear power plant in Poland. And yesterday's announcement is telling us about 24 SMRs in Poland. So we are, getting like to the fullest everything from the situation, and hopefully we will be like the new France maybe in the future, and we will have this clean energy sector. The situation has changed during the past 4, 5, maybe even 10 years, because 10 years ago we weren't even considering opening nuclear power plant. So I think after also the war in Ukraine, the beginning of the war in Ukraine and the energy crisis, and the whole situation with high prices for the electricity, with lack of energetic safety, we decided that we need to invest in nuclear. And we have to go through that way. Also, from my perspective, according to that I'm biologist, it's really important to invest in nuclear because we can spare the land, because from the really small area we can produce huge amounts of energy, and we can provide it for our citizens. So there are mostly pros than cons in.
But for the Polish case that you're saying here, we're experiencing some kind of a friendly battle between these allies of countries that actually signed the pledge a few days ago. The 24 of the world's countries, representing around 50% of the world's GDP, they signed the pledge to triple nuclear, and most of you have heard about it. And we're experiencing that these countries are like, they're battling who can do it the fastest. Then we have Poland coming out and say, we'll build 24 BWRX reactors at 6 sites. Then the Ontario plan with 4 reactors. That just seems so small and silly now. So this friendly competition that are being brought into the nuclear industry and advocacy, do you think that this will have a positive or negative effect? Will we actually overpromise in the nuclear sector, as you might be doing in Poland?
We have to be careful, and it's the political decision if we should announce like these big plans. And even I was surprised by yesterday's announcement. But I keep my fingers crossed for that, because we need to transform the energy sector in Poland. Also, we know that the technology in the coal power plants is really old in our country, and that we need to invest either in new coal power plants, which is in our current situation just mad, or invest in new nuclear power plants. Something has to work in the base of energy system, and in Poland we do not have any other way than nuclear.
And then let's take a trip from Poland down to Italy. Aurora, you're from Italy, and you're here together with another Italian pro-nuclear advocate sitting in front of you. And you're only 18, so you might... Oh, okay, Will, he's also here. You're also one of the youngest here. So what have your experience with nuclear in Italy, of course, because Italy has also been one of these, I would say, anti-nuclear countries. They were very affected after the Chernobyl accident, and there was a lot of fear-mongering in the media after that. So what are you experiencing in Italy, and most importantly, who are you?
So, hello everyone, I'm Aurora. I'm an 18 years old high school student from Italy, and I'm an admin and content creator for a science outreach page called Giovanni Blue Teens, engaging current communication about nuclear energy for other teenagers. I'm also a member of a committee which is called Nucleare Ragione, which brings together university students, professors, and experts in the nuclear industry. So the nuclear situation in Italy, if we want to think about popular opinion, is changing. Nowadays, 2/3 of Italian population under the age of 35 is actually more prone and optimistic about also considering nuclear energy into energy diversification. And we need to remember its key role against climate change. It's an amazing thing. I think it is the best example that we can have about what the humankind can achieve. We have this source of energy with low carbon emission, with a grid stability, the only industry that actually is in charge to manage its waste. And we need to know that. But when we talk about science and facts, there isn't much to debate in. What we need to work right now is a good information, because we know that people are still kind of biased by the fear of the past incidents. So that's why people actually need to inform a little better. A problem that we have in Italy is actually the education that we have. Speaking for myself, basically in Italy, when you're in middle school, okay, you have to write a thesis based on the subject that you like the most, maybe through the 3 years. The subject that interested me most was energy. And I remember that I talked about energy, and the few information that I got from Italian school books and Italian websites were mostly wrong. So I had this idea stuck in my mind for many, many years that nuclear energy was a bad source of energy. When I started high school, I started taking my first physics lesson. I started myself to inform a little better. I started to follow the Atom Advocate, the biggest Italian information page. And that's why I became passionate about this subject, because we need to inform students, we need to inform people in a right, objective, and realistic way. That's why I became an admin and content creator for Giovanni Blue.
Thank you so much. And for you, Marc, from Spain. Spain is a country with nuclear power plants, and the Spanish opinion towards nuclear hasn't always been that great. And you've actually also had a hard time actually keeping your plants together because they're sent to decommission or just close. So can you explain to me, I know that your organization is quite new in the nuclear space, nuclear advocacy. So what's your background and what are you doing in Spain to maybe save these existing reactors and maybe in the future build more nuclear to solve or mitigate climate change?
Hello, everybody. I'm Marc Altés. I am a bioengineer and nuclear engineer, and now I'm working with the management of nuclear waste and the decommissioning of nuclear installations. Yeah, Spain now have 7 reactors in operation and is the only country in all Europe that have a phase out of their nuclear power. It's very alone, Spain. I think that the principal problem of our country is that we have, in one hand, politicians that only work for win elections, not have a real interest for the best for the country or the energy. And in the other hand, in the population, we have a problem of information. In my experience, doing, for example, interviews in the street, I learned that the level of knowledge of the majority of the people about nuclear energy is the Simpson. This is the problem. I think that only working to achieve a minimum knowledge of nuclear energy did change all.
So in Spain, with your movement that you have just started not that long time ago, what are your experience with exploring the deficit in knowledge in your country's citizens? What are you doing? It's like very specifically, what are the kinds of tools that you use to educate not only the youth but also the public, also the elderly generation?
Now we have a little bit of tools.
Yeah.
No, we are very new. So all of this started 1 year ago. I opened a divulgation channel. That was a Fission Boy. I started to create videos about nuclear engineering, nuclear physics, and the people react very well. They think that is a very interesting thing, no? And some months ago, with some partners, we create EcoNucleares. That is the first environmental organization that is pro-nuclear in Spain. The first. This is the problem, that we need to do the work that all the other people not do. And what kinds of things we do, no? Divulgation, a lot of divulgation, but also we are organizing, for example, the pro-nuclear people and another, for example, the workers of the nuclear power plants to fight against the phase out, because it's very, very close, the phase out of Spain, and the people don't react.
So now we have listened to a lot of Europeans tell about how the nuclear sector is evolving in Europe and also the advocacy. What I hear from all of you young people, you're at my age, I'm only 26, so I'm not that old. But what I'm hearing is that there's a great amount of energy and there's a great amount of prosperity to actually push this movement forward. And you're pushing a movement that haven't been pushed before. Like as you say, you are Marc, you are creating the first pro-nuclear movement in Spain ever. So what we're seeing here is that's a new era of nuclear advocacy, and also the title of this debate, of course, is Nuclear Forever. But then we move to Australia, to a whole other continent. William Shackel, can you tell us about who you are and what you have been up to the last couple of months? We have seen your face appear on television screens all over the world, and also you had an interview with Macron in the start of COP. So can you tell us about who you are and what you're up to?
Well, thank you for having me, and sorry I was a bit late to this event today. I got lost, admittedly. My name's Will Shackel, and I'm a 17-year-old nuclear energy advocate from Australia. And I'm the founder of Australia's first youth-led campaign for nuclear energy, Nuclear for Australia. The situation in Australia is a very interesting one. We're the only member of the G20 with a ban on nuclear energy, so we're not even able to consider it. And I say bans with a plural because there's multiple bans in Australia. It's not just at a federal level. There's 2 bans at a federal level in Australia which completely outlaw nuclear energy and also various stages of the nuclear fuel cycle. But in addition to that, there's also local bans on top of that, and then particular regions, particular council areas which declare themselves as nuclear-free zones. So when it comes to nuclear energy, you couldn't find a place more opposed to it than perhaps Australia. But the difference is, it's only, from what I'm able to find, it's only our decision makers which are opposed to nuclear energy, because the majority of Australians, poll after poll shows that a majority of Australians support nuclear energy, and not only support lifting all the prohibitions and moratoriums, but in addition to that, support having a civil nuclear power industry in Australia. So Australia's not on track to reach our emissions targets. We can't currently consider the role of nuclear energy, and when I see nuclear energy as one of the cleanest and most reliable technologies possibly available to us for a country with the largest uranium reserves in the world, about to get floating small modular reactors in the name of our AUKUS submarines for our national security, it begs the question why we can't have reactors on land for our energy security and also to address climate change. So it's a very interesting situation we're currently experiencing in Australia, and I'm fighting for the bans on nuclear energy to be lifted so we can consider the critical role of nuclear energy in addressing the climate and energy crisis we're currently undergoing.
Thank you very much. And one thing I find interesting with all of you is that even that there are people from Europe and people from Australia, and we have met people from all over the country, we have this common value that we want to save. Is we want to solve climate change, but we want to do it with nuclear energy. And that's not that kind of a new idea, as we have heard on other panels, like Sweden, they also already solved their grid and decarbonized in the 70s. But why do you think, all of you, now I'll get back to you, Rodrigo, why do you think that nuclear energy needs these kinds of advocates? Because we don't see the same kind of advocates to wind energy and solar energy that are so in love with one technology. Why do you think that nuclear energy actually makes or attracts people that are so fond of this technology? So what is nuclear to you? What is this technology? What can it do? And what does it mean to you?
As it was said in a panel yesterday, nuclear is sexy. It's the energy source with the most density. 1 pellet of uranium, as small as this, is equivalent to a ton of coal. It's also great for a base load source of energy. It can power a lot of a big percentage of a country, and it's great in an energy mix.
Yeah, because then we can go to Julia, because in Poland, you're saying you have to phase out coal, as you said before, and you have this big burden of being maybe the dirtiest country in Europe when we look at CO2 emissions. Do you think it is possible? Because what we have heard, like we have a climate crisis to solve, and some people say that we are reaching some tipping points that they will have irreversible effects. We are actually experiencing some of them now. So for nuclear to phase out all of Poland's fossil fuels, is this realistic actually, or do we also need to focus on many more things? Like, there's also a lot of other proven technologies that have decarbonized before. So why is nuclear such a vital role in the Polish energy mix? Why couldn't we just do it with wind and solar?
It cannot be done with just wind and solar, and we, as Poles, we know that because in Poland we do not have like such a long span of days when it's windy and sunny. We can invest in offshore wind, of course, because we can find possibly on the Baltic Sea some streams of wind which is like blowing constantly. But in terms of wind on land and solar on land, it's really difficult to reach net zero without nuclear. Nuclear has this great ability to trying to push away coal and take its place. So that's why we need to invest really quickly in nuclear. Also, we don't want to leave the development. Poland in 2016 we became a developed country. It's not that long ago. We still remember, I still remember, living in the developing country, in the middle of the Europe. So we remember the times of the communism, we remember the times of not having enough electricity, having blackouts, and the times of really high energy prices, really high prices of everything, basically. And we don't want to get back to this place. I think in terms of energy transition, it's quite important to remember about the cultural context and this background, the social background also, because we've built our prosperity on coal, and right now it's, for some groups, really difficult to switch to believing in renewables. But it's easier for them to switch into believing in nuclear. For example, the whole Silesian region, the region which have coal mines there, and basically the most of the positions on which you can work are connected with coal. So they are pro-nuclear mostly. And I think that's the great reason why we should invest in that technology. On the other hand, some people in Poland, and there is still a huge group of these people, are for 100% renewables. But there is more of philosophy in that, and they do not understand how we can produce energy from nuclear because of the lack of knowledge. It's the same topic that we've already discussed, and I think we should educate them. It's easier to understand how to produce energy from wind, because we had windmills in the past. It's really old technology.
But then it's quite interesting what you're seeing as there's this divide that there is 100% renewable people, and there's the people that actually also want nuclear. And one thing that I've heard from your Aurora as well, or other Italian activists, is that there's actually a lot of people in Italy that want nuclear, but there is some kind of belief, there's some kind of ghost that travels around, that anti-nuclear ghost that make things not get done. But earlier this year, the Italian government, they actually did something with a law or a decision. Can you explain a little bit more about, has there happened some political events in Italy that is in favor of nuclear now, and where are Italy going in the future?
Okay, so right now in Italy we are kind of divided between what we consider the climate deniers and the one that glorify climate anxiety. So as a teenage girl myself, I have to deal with what other teenagers are doing. And not all of them are actually considering nuclear as part of the solution. And that's why the nuclear movement is starting to begin. That's why we want this sort of renaissance. On the political side, we kind of have a few issues, because right now the dialogue is mostly polarized. Unfortunately, nuclear power is mostly discussed among the right parties, and that's kind of a bad problem, because I don't see why a technology can only be considered from one side of the discussion and not just as it is and for its priorities. We have a Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, who is nowadays not really talking about fission. She mostly talks about fusion in climate change, considering short-term global goals, which are literally unconsiderable right now. So we need to underline the key role that fission might have in climate change, against climate change. Because we need to diversify, we need to consider it as a right technology, and Italy must be a key point for that.
And you get to a very interesting point in the discussion, like when the nuclear debate becomes politicized, like when you have ideology put into it, when you have the left and the right, you have the conservatism, you have the liberalism. And that's something like a lot of young people today with the climate agenda, they're most leaning to the left of the spectrum in politics. So do you think that this is a problem for the nuclear debate, is that it is being recognized as maybe a more right-wing topic in young people, and they don't want to commit to the cause because they don't want to be put into the same box as people from the right wing? Are you experiencing that in Italy, that there's like the left wing is a little bit of afraid to touch on nuclear because it's associated with the right wing?
Personally, I think so. When I went to climate manifestations such as Fridays for Future, I talked with my peers, I've discussed with them. Most of them rely mostly on left parties because they see as the green, the renewable thing, as the most reliable thing that we can have against climate change. But as I said, I don't think that technology should be considered as part of a political plan. We need to consider it for the best key points that we might add to the energy diversification. We also need to consider that young people want to do their best to also do actual something against climate change. When they say, okay, we want to fight against it, and I went to them and say like, okay, what are your solutions? What are your plans for that? And they say, oh, we want 100% renewable energy commitment. And I'm like, okay, but are you cautious about intermittency or other problems that comes with that? They say no, but since I don't rely on nuclear power on the things they said, I think that it's better to go on the left side. And this is kind of a problem. We need to actually come along. We need to discuss together, not only from a political point of view, but what we actually need to do to decarbonize.
And Marc, sitting aside of Aurora here, in Spain, you talked about that you have nuclear reactors, but you're actually one of the only countries that has a plan to phase them out. We've just seen Germany phase out the last 3 reactors this year, which actually corresponded to the same amount of green energy that my own home country, Denmark, built from wind turbines the last 30 years. So poof, in one day in April, they just phased out nuclear. What would this have of an effect on the future Spanish energy system if you phase out the last 7 reactors that you have in your country? Do you think that these can be replaced with wind and solar?
The Spanish energetic plan is a copy of the German, and the final result is the same that half Germany. Now Germany are substitute the nuclear energy by coal, and Spain not do this because we don't have coal. We import natural gas that is more expensive. For the economical point of view, our situation is worse than Germany. If we close all the nuclear power plants, in reality, you need more natural gas because renewables, we know that are an intermittent source of energy. And what consequence have this? No, increase of the electricity price. We need to buy a lot of natural gas. Instability, because gas is a energetic resource that have a very unstable price in the market. It is only needed to remind the gas crisis of 1 year ago. But not only this, we change the clean nuclear energy that don't emit CO2 by a fossil fuel. And not have any technical sense. So the very big problem of Spain is that the anti-nuclear parties and anti-nuclear environmental organizations say that it's better natural gas than nuclear, but not have any kind of data or any kind of paper that
supports it.
Support it,
Yeah,
exactly.
and William, you're on another continent, but it seems like when I'm following what you're on your social media and what you're releasing, it's the same kinds of topics and the same kinds of difficulties that the European young pro-nuclear advocates are fighting that you're also doing in Australia. So is it also natural gas or nuclear in Australia, or is it coal or nuclear? What is the perspective, and what are you facing now? Because I seen, I think it was today, you just got you got 5,000 signatures for your pledge for nuclear in Australia. So can you tell us a little bit about more? What is the alternatives in Australia?
So currently the plan is to go down a 100% renewable energy pathway, and that will largely be supported by natural gas, according to our Minister for Climate Change and Energy, which obviously isn't a solution to climate change. If we were serious about climate change, we wouldn't be using natural gas as that transition sort of fuel. And they're speculating that that will have to be a central part of our energy mix into the 2040s, which I just don't think is a solution to climate change. I think my general opinion, and this is something that I think all nuclear advocates should do, is to not rule out the potential of renewables. Renewables are hugely beneficial, especially for a country like Australia, where we've got vast amounts of land, we've got vast access to the sun, and of course we've got a lot of access to the wind as well. So we are well suited to renewables, and that's why we've already got around 30% renewables in our grid. The difficulty becomes, once you've got enough renewables, and we've seen this in other nations, that the problems with intermittency, when the sun doesn't shine, when the wind doesn't blow, you ultimately need a reliable source of power, and nuclear is well suited to be that reliable source of power, to fill that gap. As a base load source of power, the most reliable source of power that exists according to its capacity factor. So the argument I would have is, as Australia ramps up our renewable generation, we should keep on doing that. If there becomes a time where we're still needing to have natural gas to support those renewables, that nuclear is a far better alternative due to its credentials as one of the cleanest forms of power available to us. So that's why I'm specifically advocating for the bans on nuclear to be lifted. And as you said, my petition, I'm calling on the Australian delegation here at COP28 to support nuclear energy, and to at very least consider it. And that I've been thrilled to see that petition has got over 5,700 signatures and counting. So the Australian people are right behind the nuclear movement. They want a reliable, clean source of power in order to help us get to net zero. And importantly, nuclear energy is just one part of the energy mix that Australians want. We support renewables, but we think that nuclear is needed ultimately to get to net zero.
So what we're hearing is that from all of you, there is an argument that there is support in the population, but the politicians are left behind. There is a great need for more green, stable electricity, and you're getting it from fossil fuels, and wind and solar cannot do the job by itself. So help me crack that nut. Why are we not investing and doing more nuclear around the world? Why is this still in like some kinds of purgatory where we see a lot of promises, but we don't see a lot of results? So does any one of you like want to crack that nut with me? Why do we have that much support, but we don't see any results?
Well, I think...
Well, we can start...
I would say André. Yeah.
We can start with Portugal, and one of the reasons is that there's no public perception. Like, the politicians don't know what the people think, and so the population may be in favor, but it doesn't get to the politicians, so the things don't get done because there's no feedback loop between the public and the politicians and whatever. And also the industry, because the industry, of course, wants cheap, reliable, stable, green, and then electricity. And we also need to decarbonize, and nuclear is a good way to go about it. William, do you want to say something?
So I think whilst a majority of people support nuclear energy, and that's something we're seeing in Australia and undoubtedly in other countries, that's also the case, people aren't actually energised about it, which I know is slightly ironic when you're talking about nuclear energy. So the fact is that people have that underlying support, they are open to it, but for whatever reason they're not able to energetically get behind nuclear and push it in the same way they might push raising the issue of climate change.
But isn't that because people are afraid of being associated with nuclear power?
I think there is a certain degree to that, but I don't think that advocating for nuclear energy is a very emotional issue in the same way that advocating for more action on climate change is an emotional issue. People, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but you also have to remember that nuclear has this history with it, of course, and it's not the same about just acting for climate change. So, not seeing it as an emotional advocacy. Can you please explain?
Yeah. So I think from what we're seeing in Australia, people don't really buy a lot of that. There's a very, very small, energetic anti-nuclear movement, and obviously it's very easy to get emotional against nuclear energy, but that's becoming a really small minority. I think in Australia about 18% of people identify as anti-nuclear, and there's a very small minority who, you know, regardless of what you say, will just go after you in terms of nuclear. But that's decreasing quite significantly. The issue is it's very, very difficult to be very emotionally invested in nuclear energy, especially when there is alternatives that do exist. And I think at the same time, no one's really emotionally invested in renewables. It's very hard to get emotionally invested in renewables, or nuclear, any technology. It's much easier to, get all emotional about the fact that the climate is changing and we're going to face the impacts of it. The children may die, all of that sort of rhetoric. It's much easier to advocate for than a solution which doesn't have that same emotional basis to it, if that makes sense. And from my point of view, there is very, very little can be achieved from just mentioning the problem to people. It's all good to make sure that people are aware of the issues with climate change or with energy security, and it's much easier to make people aware of that. The more difficult thing is to get people excited and to get people emotional about the solutions, because there's no use there's no use raising the problem to decision makers if you're not actually presenting an alternative to decision makers and solutions to decision makers that they can actually embrace to solve these issues. So I think that's the difficulty we have, is wrapping around some emotional appeal around the idea of nuclear energy, which is able to energise people and is able to make them really passionately advocate for nuclear energy as a solution to climate change, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes so much sense, because you're saying that we have to energize people, we have to motivate them. How do we get people motivated and energized on nuclear? Because as we know, it's not the most simple energy source to actually understand, especially. So Julia, in Poland, now you're building new reactors, or you want to build new reactors. You have pledges.
We are going to.
You're going to build new reactors. But is the youth also excited about this? Or is it just a top-down decision from a lot of bureaucrats that just want to do nuclear? Do you have the excitement and the motivation in the youth to phase out coal with nuclear?
So I would call that the excitement and motivation to, have safe future. I would call it like that. It's not only about the nuclear, because most of our society, of our citizens, let's say our age, they are hoping to have stable future with stable job and possibility of having a family and things like that. We have to be pragmatic, because we can see that the temperature in the world is changing. This is the case of our near future. It's not our retirement or something. It's the for example reason if we would have children or not, if we would have a family or not, if we would do what we want to do or not. So we are I think in Poland specifically, we are solution-oriented when we are talking about youth. But when we are talking about middle-aged people, I feel like they are more narrative-oriented. They prefer to think about this romantic view of, it depends if they are for nuclear or anti-nuclear, but if they are for nuclear, of nuclear power plant somewhere, there are flying birds, and there's a meadow in front of it and the forest somewhere in the distance. If they are thinking about renewables, they love to think about the idea of, also really romantic one, of the world powered by the wind and solar and I think it's beautiful, but we have to be realist. We have to be pragmatic. We have to think about the solution which can bring us, like, a way to tackling the climate change and the biodiversity loss. So we can build a narrative around everything, but it's more about the solution and the technology that we already have. So I think that's the perspective of the younger generation in Poland, but we also have to be cautious about like the perspective of other generations. We have to try to combine that and make this multi-generational like dialogue between each other and try to have these sometimes difficult conversations.
And it's these conversations that counts, because if we want to solve climate change, we have to do these difficult conversations. You sometimes, as a young advocate, has to kick in the door and actually take the consequences of maybe saying something that you maybe regret the day after, but you have to kick in the door sometimes. And we see that in all countries. Like I've seen you people on television or in articles being interviewed, where you're actually showing emotion. You're showing that you care about the climate. But is this just a trend? Because this growth in nuclear advocacy, it has grown a lot the last 5 years. But what I sometimes can be a little bit afraid of is that if this just a trend that will just disappear in some years. So will nuclear, as the title of the debate, actually be forever? Or is it just a new trend that a lot of young people jump on and it's exciting and it makes a lot of sense, but in the future you'll just find a new thing to actually advocate for? Or is it something that we will stick with?
Well, I think people are starting to realise some of the complicated factors involved in an energy transition. And as we go further and further towards net zero, there are going to be more questions asked, and people are going to realise that it's much, much more complicated than just installing solar panels and wind turbines everywhere. We're certainly finding that in Australia there's a huge NIMBYism sort of argument emerging against renewables in agricultural communities and also Indigenous communities, where there's becoming huge pushback. And I think because of that, because of the fact that there is going to have to start being such a much more nuanced conversation around the energy transition and some of the unforeseen complications which are brought by it, nuclear energy will always have a role, because I think why nuclear energy is becoming relevant now is because people are starting to think about it a bit more and starting, I guess, to be a bit more pragmatic around the energy transition. And once you start, I think, thinking through that lens of pragmatism, nuclear energy is a very, very appealing option, you know, whether it's due to the energy density or the fact that it's an incredibly it's got incredible credentials in terms of its energy security, the fact it is zero emissions, the fact that it is a proven technology which is actually demonstrated and is a proven path to net zero in a way that, you know, going just with solar panels or just with wind turbines, it is not been demonstrated that a developed major nation has been able to get to net zero just with solar panels or just with wind turbines. And where rather with nuclear, there are countries, whether that with France or other nations, which have been able to demonstrate that. So I think as we start to consider the energy transition a bit more deeply, nuclear will always be there. So I don't think it's just a trend. I think more people will jump onto this boat as long as the industry still do their part and develop nuclear reactors. That are economically viable and all of those sort of things. So I don't think it's just a trend.
And that argument is ending on that, is saying that the advocacy is there, the support is there, the actual momentum is there, the politics in some sense are there. But now we need the industry to actually deliver on this. And another nuclear influencer, Isabel Bomeke, she said on a talk some days ago inside the Blue Zone that this might be our last chance at the nuclear renaissance, because we have the nuclear industry, not the advocates, but the industry has overpromised again and again that we are facing a nuclear renaissance and now is the time. But every time they seem to not get it right. So this might be the last time. So would any of you elaborate on that? Do you think this will be the last time? How do we have the opportunity to actually fail again? Or is this bang or bust this time?
I believe this time is for real. So we need to get serious about climate change. And when we get serious about climate change, we need to get serious about decarbonization. And so in order to get a good, stable decarbonization, nuclear energy is a necessary foundational piece of it.
Yeah, of course. But that's the thing, because nuclear energy is here to stay, of course. That is the thing. But we can also fail. There's a chance that this is just a spoof, that the industry don't deliver, there's this momentum, and what will we then do? Like,
You know, in the history of life on our planet, we had things like, for example, Great Oxygen Event, which was a tragedy for organisms who were like using different substances to like go through their metabolic chains. So yeah, we will have great CO2 event, and you know, for our kind and for the life that we know right now, it may be the end. But the life in general, we know bacteria or microorganisms who can stay alive in this kind of, let's say, under this type of circumstances. So yeah, that's our future. If we want to invest in nuclear, it's really bright, but maybe not for us.
So if we don't invest in nuclear, we will not, as a human species, survive. Maybe bacteria will. But William, can you elaborate on this again?
I think
it's the biologist view, of course.
Yes, the nuclear industry can't fail. The stakes have never been higher. We need nuclear energy globally to reach net zero. That is something that most bodies are telling us, whether it's the International Energy Agency or the IPCC. So if the nuclear industry does fail, they need to understand that that means that we're probably not going to get on track to reach our climate targets, that the world could suffer energy poverty. So there is a huge imperative at this very moment for the nuclear industry to succeed. And hopefully they do understand the stakes, because if they're not able to do their job, and we're doing all we can to encourage them to be able to do their job and to help them succeed. If they're not able to do their job, then that's going to have huge consequences for all of us as youth advocates and all of our generation and future generations. So, we better hope that they do their job. And I think we can be optimistic that when we know the stakes are so high at the moment, that they will hopefully realise that, start doing their jobs, and hopefully succeed.
And it feels so, in one way, fantastic, but also so annoying, sitting there, like the actual public support and advocacy is what's actually there. But the industry is not there. It's the opposite in a lot of other complicated topics. So do we think this is do we think this is an advantage, that we have already solved the advocacy and political and support problem and we only need the industry? Or it's actually the biggest problem is the industry? So are we facing a lot harder challenge now to actually deploy, deliver on time and on budget, and seeing projects delivered? Because that's a pretty huge thing, and nuclear projects it's pretty complicated, we know. It requires a lot of money. So what are your thoughts in the future? What do you expect happening in the 10 years? Maybe Marc, what are you expecting in Spain to happen in the next 10 years surrounding nuclear?
In general, for the industry part.
Yeah, it just on a whole level.
What I think, this is very complicated. I think that in reality, the government start the phase out, all these anti-nuclear plants, but they will have a lot of problems. Not for also for maybe public opinion and all of these things, but a technical problem, because the phase out of Spain is technically impossible now. In one hand, we have to replace all this nuclear power with another thing. We don't have this another thing. It is needed to build, and very, very fast. But in the other hand, we have to the commissioning decommissioning all these nuclear facilities, and we don't have the technical capacities to do this. We only decommission one per one nuclear power plant, and the Spanish plan in some moments are decommissioning like 7 reactors at the same time. They don't have the nuclear capacity to do this.
So it seems impossible for Spain to actually go through with this phase out. But Aurora, in Italy, what do you think the future will bring for the nuclear industry and also advocacy? Do you think that you will actually manage to push through and actually begin building nuclear plants in Italy? Because of course we know it's not just something that you do overnight. It takes at least a decade for a country, a new coming country into the nuclear sector, to actually connect a nuclear reactor to another. Where do you think Italy is in 10 years?
Well, right now in Italy, we mostly depend on gas with a 12-15% of imported energy. So we need to understand that if we want to meet the 2050 global goals issue, we need to actually consider also nuclear through the energy diversification. We had an history, in Italian history, with nuclear power plants. We did them in the history, in the 60s. They were great. And some people might say, oh, but you had the 2011 referendum, so you cannot do it anymore. Well, that's not actually true. We're still able to actually do something, and that's why we need to inform people. That's why we actually need to do advocacy, because climate change is not going to wait for us. And since nuclear is our only solution, we need to do something right now.
And Julia, what do you think? Like, you have a pledge to connect the reactor in nearly 10 years, in 2035 in Poland. Do you think it's going to happen?
I hope. I have a huge hope for this project. You know, the problem in Poland is that sometimes, like, the public opinion can change really rapidly. But that's why we are there and we are educating all the time, because usually these problems are connected with lack of education. So, for example, we are not only advocating for nuclear, but we are also going to schools. We are learning, learning too, but teaching kids how they should get the knowledge. No, we are not giving them everything like, here, this is the data, you have to learn it by heart, and then you have to believe in our case. We are teaching them how to do fact-checking. We are teaching them how to make their own opinions. So we hope we will maybe not create, but we will help with the creation of the new generation of citizens who are educated, who have their own opinion, but based on facts and not on opinions of the others. So this is my hope, and I think with, Poles are not stupid. We can do that. We can be educated, and we can invest in nuclear and in new technologies in general. So I have really high hopes connected with this project and with this plan.
And for Portugal, André and Roberto, what do you think is going to happen in the next 10 years? Like, one thing is Poland, they have their plans to build their nuclear power plants, of course. But you don't have nuclear power. Do you think that you in 10 years, as well as Aurora talked about with Italy, as a country that doesn't have nuclear power, do you think that you will start a nuclear power program in these 10 years and you will actually be on the road to developing your first nuclear power plant?
I don't think that in the next 10 years we'll get there. Maybe it's 12 years, maybe it's 13 years, but it's that close. But why do I say this? Because we had this project for 2006 where a big part of the work was done. And right now we're talking with the person responsible for the project to get it back up, to talk to the industry, talk to the politicians, and get the project back up, to make the laws allow for the project to go on and to get it done afterwards.
So you're actually reviving an old project from the death to become alive again in Poland.
We're bringing out the giants. We're bringing out the giants. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, and we like to see them walk, and we're going in the same direction. That's about it. And we want to bring it back up and get it to work. That's it.
You want to add?
Yeah. I don't think in 10 years, as André said, I don't think we'll get there. but seeing the movement in Europe and all over the world, this climate pledge, the 3 times nuclear pledge, I think Portugal will follow that trend. We're normally very precautious about the new things, but I think if Europe and France we follow a lot France, and seeing this all over Europe, all over the world, I think Portugal will follow. Not right now, but maybe in 5 years they'll start a great thing and a great nuclear program.
Thank you so much. And William, you have the last words. What do you think of the future of nuclear in Australia? Do you actually think that you'll succeed and make the population understand that nuclear should be a part of the Australian energy mix?
Look, as I said, I think the population is on side. They understand that nuclear energy should be considered as one of the options on the table. And I think that many, and we've seen this particularly in this year in Australia, in terms of our decision makers, our opposition parties just come out in support of nuclear energy. There's huge momentum behind nuclear. I don't see it going anywhere. I think it's only going to continue to progress towards us considering nuclear energy and lifting the bans. I'm optimistic that we will be able to lift the bans on nuclear energy in Australia. I don't think there's any justifications for them, especially when you consider the loopholes which are having to be made so that we can have our AUKUS submarines, which are, the floating small modular reactors, which are going to be floating around our capital cities, providing power to our submarines for our national security. And then at the same time, we're going to have our government our government will be spending hundreds of billions of dollars on those submarines, but at the same time can't even consider nuclear reactors on land for our energy security. So I think at very least, the prohibitions are untenable. I'm very optimistic, and I hope that one day we will see a civil nuclear power reactor in Australia. I can't tell you when that will be. But when you consider the fact that Australia is a country which is home to many great innovations, we were the creators of Wi-Fi, of penicillin, of Google Maps even, there's no reason why Australia couldn't take a technology like nuclear energy, put our spin on it, and be a world leader when it comes to nuclear, and also hopefully be a world leader in reaching net zero. So I maintain a deep optimism. Unfortunately, some of our decision makers are staunchly against nuclear, but I hope that we can at one point change their minds, and at one point Australia will have the option to be able to go nuclear.
And that's a great note to end on. Optimism and hope for the future, and you're not pessimistic. All of you 6 fantastic young nuclear advocates, you're actually looking forward, and you believe in there being a future for nuclear. Thank you so much for participating in this panel, from Roberto to André, Julia, Aurora, Marc, and William. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for listening.